Hello, everybody, and welcome. Today's 3 at 3 with Angela James. As expected, I am Angela James, and I'm here to answer 3 of your questions that were submitted in the past few weeks live here in Facebook. I am also on LinkedIn and YouTube. Thank you for joining me. I am so glad to be having so many questions. We actually have now a backlog of questions. We have questions that will come next week. So, excuse me, 2 weeks from now. So I'm excited to answer these questions. And thank you for submitting these questions and giving me questions to ask. So I'm going to get right to it. And we are going to start with the first question, which is, what editing advice do you have for a new author who can't afford an editor but doesn't want their first self-published book to look bad? So this is a great question, and thank you for asking it. This is really hard because as an industry, a lot of times people come at this from a position of privilege and say, oh, you shouldn't self-publish without editing. And that's why self-published books are all bad, because there's no editing. And really, there's just this huge position of privilege. And I must admit that for a long time, I was one of those people who said, oh, you have to have a book edited before you can have it released. I have since changed my philosophy on this because I think there's a lot of people out there who have amazing stories to tell and can't always afford an editor. And I don't think that those people should be held back from publishing their book or sharing their book. So I do have some advice for when you can't afford an editor. I have lots of editing advice for when you can't afford an editor, and that is all included in Before You Hit Send. If you're curious about Before You Hit Send, you can find that on my website, www.angelajames.co. So Before You Hit Send, there's information about Before You Hit Send on there. But if you can't afford Before You Hit Send, if you can't afford an editor, then my next advice is to make sure that you're going through as much free information that's good on the internet about self-editing, that you have a self-editing checklist set up, and that you're following a process, so that there's some logical way that you're editing, so that you know that you're not missing things. Taking craft classes that you can afford is another way to approach editing. And then, other than classes, finding really solid critique partners that can offer you critique, finding beta readers that will give you great feedback. And I don't just mean beta readers who will be like, or critique partners who will be like, oh, this is great, you should publish this as is, but people who can give you critical feedback from a reader's point of view. The other thing that you can do is swap with somebody. If there's a particular skill that you have, you could swap with somebody who's great at editing and ask them to give you some editing advice. Maybe you can find somebody who will edit a few pages for you just to show some of the things that you might need to work on as far as copy editing and proofreading and line editing. And you can take that advice forward and apply it to your whole manuscript. So I would say that just because you can't afford editing doesn't mean you can't publish, but it also doesn't mean that you shouldn't edit the book at all. It just means that you're going to have to find new ways, different ways of editing the book yourself, and making sure that you're giving the reader the best reader experience possible. So it's not that I'm saying, yeah, go ahead, publish without editing. I'm just saying you just need to think different about it and find ways that you are going to create a situation in which you are giving the best reader experience. The reader experience is very important. But the one thing that I will tell you is that when we talk about reader experience and we talk about editing, focus on creating the best story possible with the best characterization possible, because those are the two things that the readers are going to be reading for. I have found through self-publishing that readers will forgive or not even notice typos or missing commas. Not to say that those things don't detract from the reading experience, because they absolutely can. But when a reader falls in love with the story and characters, they're going to forgive a lot. So I just want you to make sure that you are spending time developing the story, developing the characters, getting feedback on those things. Don't just worry about line editing and commas and copy editing and proofreading. Those things are important, but the story and the characters are most important. So again, I don't want to introduce barriers to self-publishing for you. I'm trying to help you find ways of thinking differently about moving around the barriers. And as your book starts to make money, you can hire a professional editor, you can hire a professional line editor, copy editor, proofreader. As you begin to work on your craft, that's the other thing, is that you can go back and make changes. Here's the other thing that I want you to keep in mind. If you are a new writer, not every book does need to be published. So sometimes those early books should just be practice, learning your craft. Don't think that just because it was written, it needs to be published. So if you're feeling like you can't afford craft classes, you're not able to find critique partners, and you're just struggling with your writing, or you're just learning how to write a manuscript, then write the next story, and then write the next story. So you're going to improve with every story that you wrote. So don't just think, I wrote this one, I have to publish it. Don't be in a rush. Remember that some things are just for practice. So that's okay as well. Thank you for that comment and for that question. If you have any follow-up questions about that, please let me know. All right, next question. Oops, not that one. What programs could a new author use to design their own book cover if they have something specific in mind? So as far as book covers go, you can use Canva. I know authors use Canva for creating book covers. My suggestion is, if you don't have design skills at all, find a template from a book designer. A lot of book cover designers offer some fairly inexpensive templates. Book cover isn't the place that you want to start learning your design skills. You can start learning your design skills with marketing and advertisement and graphics for social media. Your book cover isn't the place that you want to start learning design skills. So the first thing I would do is I would just find an inexpensive template from a graphic designer, from a book designer, and start with using that. And then in the future, you can change the cover either to something that you buy that's custom made, or something that you've designed yourself after you've learned design skills. The book cover is so important to first impressions that I'm just so hesitant to be like, yeah, you totally got this. Unless you're a designer, unless you already have design skills, then I would say, okay, Canva, give Canva a try. InDesign is another one. Adobe. Those are all programs that people use to design covers, but the cover is crucial. And I'm not saying, obviously we can compare and contrast this to what I'm saying about editing versus covers, but if you have a bad cover that is immediately going to make somebody feel like they're getting contents of the book that are really messy and sloppy, it's going to be that much harder to sell the book. So I don't recommend learning book cover design and then immediately creating your own book cover. So that's the place where I'm kind of like, let's look at you can get some inexpensive templates. That's one place where you can spend like $50 and get something. Now, I know that as an author, you have a very specific concept in mind. The other thing to know about book covers is that there is a formula. There's things that readers look for. There's cues on the cover. And if you're not working with a graphic designer, even having a concept and trying to execute that concept can make a book harder to sell. And because you don't have that background in book marketing and understanding what draws readers in and what's signaling to them with your cover, again, you can see that this is where my hesitation comes in. Because the cover is so important in selling the book, I want to encourage you to either work with a cover designer or just buy a template and focus on the book insides and what you want to present there versus completely executing your concept of the cover. I know that's probably not the most popular answer because authors often have like this image in their head, but the image isn't always easy to execute. And again, if you don't have design skills, now is not the time to be doing that with this product that you're trying to market. Okay, next question. Third question. Although I normally write in fiction, I've been toying with a play lately. Can you talk about the differences in trying to publish one and where you might go to find an agent for that market? I don't have a lot of experience with stage plays, so I don't have great advice for this. And I'm going to encourage you to look for people who do write plays. I know there's a lot of people on the internet who give advice about this and who can give advice about finding agents for that. I would also say that these agents are different than quite often than the literary agents that we're working with in the fiction and even the nonfiction market. So definitely look for somebody who's specializing in that. So the first thing that I'm going to recommend is that you look at books that have been published that talk about how to get your screenplay published. That's a really good resource to start with. Also start with message boards that focus on writing screenplays. And I believe that the person who put this question in, I'm losing my words. The person who submitted this question works in a theater setting, in a school setting. So you could start just kind of Googling some of the people that you know that are playwrights and seeing who their agents are and backtracking that way. So again, I'm sorry, this is not my area of expertise. So I'm trying to give you some steps to start with, but I am not the person to ask of this, although I do appreciate you asking. But as many of you know, if I don't know the answer to something, I would rather say I don't know than just lead you down some bullshit alley. So I don't know the answer, but those are some steps that you can take to get started. And definitely do look in areas that aren't fiction writing, because it is a completely different thing. Okay, so that was the 3 at 3. I always try and keep this under 15 minutes, and I have done that this time. We have a couple of questions for next time, but there's still room to get your questions in for next time. I still have room. So if you want your question to be answered in the next one, get it in, because I do answer them in first come, first serve order. The link is in the description. You can submit your questions through there. We also send those out in the newsletters, and we also put the link in my private Facebook group, The Publishing Insider. Thank you all for joining me. If you have any follow-up questions, please let me know on Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube. I'm happy to answer the comments. And if you're from Written to Recommended member, you can also ask me follow-up questions in the community. Thank you all for joining me. Happy Monday. Have a wonderful week.